Hey, so I stopped doing some grubby work today. We're here for another stunt rigging toolbox talk. And I've just been busy building shit and I got tired of it. So I thought I'd stop for a second and do something that's been on my mind since I've seen a lot of stuff online and a lot of people posting stuff on rigs that I'm not going to slam the rigs because they obviously functioned. But there's a better way to do it. And it's I'm going to talk about something that's the simplest thing we always start with, and it's a pendulum. Basically, you have a pulley overhead, and the plumb line is wherever it is on the floor, and you back up. If you lift someone, we'll start with pulling because it's different things that happen with pulling and dropping. At that point, it becomes if you lift the person, they'll swing over the center line again and back an equal side. It's like it's an equal reaction. So if this is center line, they start here, they process through here, and then they swing to here. And if there was no drag or anything with people, then they would just swing back and forth. Okay, same equal distance on each side. When we do just an up and downer, we always have to center the people under the pulley because as you lift them, you don't want them swinging forward or backward. Okay. Couple things to mention about pendulums. First, the shorter the length between the pulley and the performer, the faster the pendulum processes, the faster it swings. The longer it it processes slower. So it's a big, longer arc, okay? We can use them for the good and for the bad. You just have to decide because there's a lot of things that guys use pendulums for that should be other rigs, because mainly if something fucks up, you have no recourse. The person is dealing with gravity and it creates a vector. So if you lift someone from here, they're going to swing past middle point and keep going. Okay, so if you want to stop somebody under the pulley, you have to have a brake line on them of some kind. Okay, if you want them to stop somewhere on this side at a specific point, because that's what we do. We don't just throw people around. Anybody can push a button or pull a rope and just huck somebody. The point is takeoffs and landings. They're definitive points. So you're basically, if you plot it out on a piece of graph paper, you're going from here to here. One of the things about pendulums is at the vertical plumb line under the pulley, it's X distance. Okay, say your perms is 12 meters. If you back them up and keep backing them up, okay, to get whatever motion distance you're looking for, that rope, because it's the hypotenuse of a triangle, gets shorter, so you need to give them more and more rope. So if your center line is 12 meters and then you come out here 5 meters, it's going to be X, I could do the math, but I won't have to, it's going to be X number of centimeters shorter than here. So you'll have to let out rope so they can stand here. So by lifting them, you have to lift them enough to clear this center line or lift them the height you want them. And as they swing across, now notice it's going to speed up because you've shortened this. They're going to swing across, but you want to land them over here at a specific point. So you have to come up with a way to lift them and then drop them and set them down. And this can be accomplished many different ways. You could do it with ratchets. We do the ET flying on a big stage, like literally 30 meters of travel with a big pendulum. You just calculate your center point and where you want them to be height-wise at the apex of the trajectory of their flight. So as they take off, they go up, they swing across, and they come down. Okay, so it makes their flight is actually the inverse of what's happening with the pulley. They start low, because technically if this is a fixed length, they would start high, swing low, and swing high. Okay? But by changing the variable length on this, what you do is you start long, you pull them up, they swing across, and then you can let them out, okay? We do this a lot with ratchets. It depends on how your ratchets are configured and how you use them and how they exhaust, because face it, once you fill the cylinder, you get off the button and the weight is pulling the air back out of the cylinder. Unless you have a super good flowing system, it's going to be more brakes than you need. And what's going to happen is they're going to go up, they're going to swing, and they go, and then they'll start swinging back before they get to the ground. So a lot of times you have a surface loop, you'll ratchet them in the air, they'll start swinging across, so the trajectory is really nice. And then if you want to put them in a specific spot, and you can let them out at any point you want here. The longer you go, so if you start 5 meters off the center line, if you let them go to the apex of that swing, it would be, you could set them down at 5 meters on the other side of center line. Okay? So you could swing them, and it won't look like they're swinging, because basically what you do is you pull them hard enough, you don't get them weightless. So this is an instance where you would use not a 1 to 2 for the quickness, you'd probably go 1 to 1. You'd pull them up, and as the rope stays taut, you don't want them to accelerate faster than the take up on the rope. You don't want them to go weightless, because it'll create a judder at the top. They'll go weightless and then boom, fall into the slack, get rid of the slack, swing across, and then you'll drop them. Or set them down. It's not a drop, actually. But you can put a service loop in, so you hit the button on the ratchet, it moves through, and on the other end you just keep the cylinder in, and on the other end you have a gold tail, and then you just let them out on the gold tail where you'd like to use that, and that's how you do that. The problem with any pendulum is it creates a vector of travel. It creates a direction of travel. So you have to learn to work with that to either achieve the results you want or create something that will mitigate that. A lot of times you'll want to travel someone, so if you're pulling them, if you yank them by hand or motivate them, however you want to call it, with a ratchet or with a hand pull, whatever you're doing, you're going to pull them, and then they're going to swing under the pulley. Everything always tries to orient under the pulley, but it's a vector. So now you have momentum in a direction as you pendulum, okay? That's great, but if you need to stop them somewhere, you have to have a second line on them to stop them at that point. And however you want to rig that, there's gold tail brakes, there's varieties of ways to do it. But you have to somehow mitigate that vector unless you're going to let them swing through and then set them down. And a really easy way to do it is you ratchet the person, they fly through the air, but they never get weightless. As they cross under the pulley and start to go, because they're moving in a vector on a pendulum, as they start to go out, you decide at what point you want to let them out, and that's when you gold tail them out, so they go up, swing across, and then down and land. So you can do this and use the pendulum, and you can make it short, you can lower them quicker, you can make it as long as possible, like on a swing set. You get to the apex and then come out of it and you will come down. But remember, you're always going to have to, because the distance from the ceiling to the floor, the pulley to the floor, is your longest point. At both ends, you're going to have to let people out. Okay, so at the beginning, you have to take in to get rid of the distance for the travel and the height you want to see. And at the other end, when it processes up to the peak of the pendulum, on the opposite side, you're going to be that high, and you're going to need to get them to the ground. And it's not going to be a vertical, it's going to be a tangent line to the ground. So you always have to remember when you're pulling and using a pendulum, how these things work. And you have to have brake systems prepared. You have to know that it's going to process an equal distance on either side, especially if you're using mechanical means, i.e. a ratchet. You can't accelerate them into weightlessness, or you're going to drop them back into the slack that you've created in the line. And that's going to be problematic, unless, of course, you've planned for it and you have a take-up in the system. So as you ratchet them high, you suck the line up so they're in tension at the peak, so they go weightless, but you eliminate that slack. You have somebody on a service loop watching that. You pull all that in, and now they're on the line as they come to the decel phase to come to the ground. So that can be seamless as well, but you have to think about these things and allow for them. With a hand pull, people tend not to go weightless because you can't get the motion moving hard enough and fast enough. So people will ride it, and then it's your human ballast. So as they go from a lift, you jump off a ladder or whatever, boom, they launch. As they come around to land, you can either feed out rope, or sometimes you just, the action, because they're moving, they have dynamic force now. They're more than, let's call it 100 kilos up. So they're more than 100 kilos coming down because they have that vector of speed, right? So now they're heavier and they will lift you off the ground and you become the counterweight and you go airborne under your pulling station as you decelerate them to the ground. That's the primitive way to do it, is human counterweight. If you use machines, you try to bring in things like gold tails, and you can automate all of this, which is a whole nother discussion. But you can make it so you hit the button, they fly, they process under the pulley and off to the other side of the pendulum, the equidistant motion on both sides. And as they swing here, you have a service loop designed to, because the ratchet has taken up that distance, and all you have is a service loop where you have a mark and then you let out that distance and gradually slow them down as they're peaking. You lengthen the line until they land. So it becomes a very smooth, what you see visually is the person leave and land. It's a big arc, like think of an ET flight. Okay, you can do that quite well. But you always have to consider your landing point, your takeoff point, and the pendulum, and the distances on both sides. Okay? So if you're going to use a pendulum, like the classic is you put a pulley to ratchet somebody into a wall so it looks like they've slammed it, whatever, has blown them up, hit the wall, whatever you want to call it. So they take off hard and fast and they're going to the wall. You have to have a way of decelerating them so that they stop prior to impact, okay? And you need to be able to hold them up there. So and then drop them possibly. So each one of these things adds something to your basic pendulum system. A lot of times pendulums get used incorrectly, whereas a slack line, if the ceiling height's enough, would do quite well, because you can process the bite in your slack line while they roll it to achieve the distance of travel, and you have control because as they go past, so if here's your vertical in between your two pulleys, and you have a vertical, it's the same as being oriented under your pulley. If you lift them, they will hang in a certain spot between these two pulleys, the exact center point between them, okay? So if you start them 5 meters to one side and you lift them, they will roll 5 meters to the other side, because what happens is at 0, directly under where the bite would be, they go into braking. They start slowing down because the rope is technically trying to run the pulley uphill and run the performer uphill, so you're gradually slowing them down, and you can let out at that point on the line and set them down. So a lot of times that's a far better option, and it's a way of controlling the vector force because you go into braking and it helps you already. You've already created a way of decelerating the motion. Not just a pendulum, which whoop, you're stuck. It's going to be what it's going to be, and you have to somehow get rid of those forces. So the main thing is the shorter the pendulum, the faster the reaction, the swing, the longer, the slower. So you can use those two factors. You also have to figure out where you need to land and place your pulleys accordingly. Remember, it's an equal distance on either side, okay? So if you're going to use a pendulum, you have to be aware of your marks, your takeoffs and your landings for your pendulum. The next topic would be, how high do they have to fly? How much rope do I have to take up? How much slack is there that I need to deal with? Et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, a pendulum's not ideal because you have to take up so much rope from their travel A to travel B because of the fact that it's a triangle, and the vertical under the pulley or directly under the pulley is X distance, and then you end up out here, which the hypotenuse of that triangle is far shorter when you get out here. That length, 12 meters here, and 5 or 8 or 10 meters out, that 12 meters is 5 meters short of the ground. Okay, so you have to come up with a way to make up that distance. So now you need service loops, you need ways to let out the line. These become problematic, especially for longer distances, and that's why you try not to use pendulums for super long distances, because there's too many problems that come with them. And as I said, if you use a ram to do it, it's really easy to do, it's great, but we always run them at 1 to 2 we have that super quick. Remember, speed and time are not the same thing, Okay, so you have to always remember that. There's a relationship between speed and time. So when you run a ratchet reversed 1 to 2, for every bit of stroke the ram pulls in, it doubles the rope speed. Okay, what that means is very quickly you can get them accelerating much faster than gravity. Okay, so now they are flying and all you're doing is taking up slack out of the rope. Once you've launched them, now they're moving faster than the rope moves, or they've gone farther than what you've pulled them, which is common. And now you have a body in free space with slack line. Okay, and so when it comes dropping again, it will boop, take up that slack, and you will see that, it will read that instantly. Plus, it's not really pleasant if it's a big one where you get pulled up and then you're here, and all of a sudden you drop, and then doink, you get caught and go. It's much better to just go 1 to 1 and pull them at a steady rate so they don't get weightless. You cover the distance as they swing under the pendulum, it's all smooth, and then you can let them out, okay? And usually that requires, like I said, a service loop with a gold tail or some other form of braking. There's, a million ways, but that's a simple way. A service loop with that. So you always have to remember how to use your pendulum when you're pulling. That's important. And also analyze your distance travel. Because pendulums are good for smaller stuff. If you're going to use them for big stuff, like I mentioned the ET, and like I said, I can use them for a huge distance. I go 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1 on the ram, on a long stroke ram, and I can take up, well, on an 8 foot, on a 2.5 meter, I can take up, up to 12 times that, because the way it's mine compound. But you have to have the power to be able to do that, because it's the inverse. You need more power every time you go compounding in reverse. And then you also have to think of your heights, your distances of take-ups, and how you're going to lower them down. Okay, so this becomes the game you play back and forth with a pendulum. Okay, whereas with a slack line, it becomes a super steep slack line becomes very manageable. You get the forward movement, you get the vertical is under the bite, you can move them from A to B, and now that's a pendulum technically, because the rope is a bite. If you start them back here, you let out rope, you take up rope, they swing across, and they're moving, and then you set them down over here. You still need to lower them, but you can control, especially if you purposefully pull them hard enough to where they will roll farther than the pendulum takes them. As they go into vertical, from the plumb line of the bite, in the other direction, they're now running uphill. So they're absorbing energy in the line and in the system as they're moving. So now you've taken away a lot of that acceleration and you're in deceleration. So it's an equal on both sides. And that becomes a way of slowing them down and setting them down. And if you have a system there, you can either, like I said, use your rams, get off the button, let it exhaust. That's why we have flow controls on the exhaust. But it all hangs on how much your system flows and how quick and how good everything is. And the problem is a lot of systems don't do that well. Or you just leave the ram in so that when you hit it, it pulls them up the distance as they go through. Another operator uses a gold tail or similar decel to let the line back out again, and you can set them down. And you tend not to need a decel line, generally speaking, if you've planned your objects and distances. Of course, there's always those things where it's a long flight to get there, and literally you're stopping just past plumb. So then, of course, you'll always have some form of deceleration to it. But on one show, we fought a whole giant swing maneuver, and we were trying to do rope take up and everything else, because the takeoff was 4 meters, 5 meters off the ground, and then they would swing and they had to come back up 4 to 5 meters to get over an object and then back where they belong at the other end of the swing. And the problem was trying to get that take up in here, because they would always get too close to the ground and then back up. So by the time you took that up and you waited for them to come up here, it just wasn't working. So what we had to do was adjust the plumb of the pendulum and move the rig from their takeoff, and then change the landing point so it was equidistant, and then we were good with that. It worked. But Before it was too long on one side, too short on the other, and you could never achieve it. And we had rams for take up, and we had all sorts of stuff, but that none of them worked fast enough, correct enough. And as we worked and worked and worked to get it, the next day we all kind of looked at one another and went, pendulums, they're equidistant on both sides of plumb. So technically to do this, if that's the takeoff, we can mark plumb and then mark how far at the other side of the pendulum they will land and adjust that mark. Instead of having it be super long here and then having a takeoff and then having that distance and then trying to land them much shorter or much longer on the other side, because it was just too much rope management. You couldn't get it in and back out fast enough. So you adjusted your takeoffs and landings so that they were equidistant on either side of the plumb line. And it was one of those things, you start chasing your tail and adding things to the system, and instead of just backtracking and going, oh, it's a pendulum, it's equidistant on both sides of plumb. So these are things you need to pay attention to, and it sounds, everybody's like, oh, fuck yeah, that's stupid. Yeah, we know that. You don't know how many times I've watched people paint themselves into corners doing this. And a pendulum is not always the optimal way to do this. So, you have to think about it a lot. And what I did was you have to look at your motivation on pulling. You have to look at your plumb line and your distances A and B and calculate how much different the length is of rope to be at the ground here, so that's going to be whatever length that is. And the easy way to do that is make a triangle out of it, and it's A squared, B squared, is C squared. So say, A squared, call it 10 meters, A squared, call it, and the distance you want to go is 5 meters here. So A squared is 100, 5 squared is 25, equals C squared. So you take the square root of 125, and that's how long your rope's going to be here. So that tells you what your distance is missing, and that tells you how much you need to take up. So sometimes this is a manageable number, but sometimes it's not. If this is 12 meters and that you want another 12 meters, and they have to start 12 meters out here, now you're talking some serious distance. So you have to figure out how to maintain it. Plus the velocity you encounter from this point to this point, even if it's a simple swing. I mean, we all play with swings, So if it's 12 meters and you start and you launch, by the time you swing through here, you've got some serious speed going on. So you have to think of what you need to do and where you need to land, okay? So this becomes an issue because, especially if you're going to play the pendulum game and you have to cut this side short, well, what do you do to get rid of that speed in half the distance? Because it's going to want to go all the way to here. Now, you have to decide how to slow them down. And a lot of times you can take the speed out of stuff by just lowering them, because what happens is as they swing, the minute you take tension off of that and lengthen it, they'll come to here and then aim for the ground in a tangent along that plumb line. So they'll go from here, swing to here, and then you can let them out. Okay, and if that's a gold tail, you can control their speed. The problem is also, if you control it too much, they'll start swinging backwards, coming back, because now you've taken all the energy out of the forward momentum as they drop, and they will come back before they hit the ground. So it's a real fine line operating to get that right, which is why I say a lot of times there's other ways to achieve it. But, that's the basics on pendulums, and they're not as simple as everybody wants to make them sound. Everybody's like, oh, it's so fucking stupid. It's not, because nobody thinks about it. And their first thing is, oh, we'll just, the first thing you watch anybody do at stunt rigging is put up a pendulum. They're going to pull somebody from here, they're going to yank them, and they're going to swing over to here, and they're going to set them down. Okay? Sounds great, but you got to... you can fuck around and find out, or, especially if you got to go hang a pulley in the reds, you better put it in the right place. Okay? So it always helps to start with your plumb, your takeoff, your end points, and then figure out how you're going to work those all out before you start stacking gear in the ceiling, because once you're in, you can move it 25 times to get it right. So it makes sense to diagram it out and then to lay it out on the floor and lay it out in the actual set or on wherever you happen to be to do this. And then you've got a far better chance. And these are things you need to think about. The vectors of motion, the speed you're going to achieve. Do you need a braking system? Is the landing higher or lower than the takeoff? This also becomes a thing. The age old, you yank somebody who's jumping off of something and they have to swing, and then they're going to end up off the second floor. They have to land on the ground. Okay, so they get ratcheted here, they pivot out. Now they've got to drop an additional distance on top of what you've pulled them to generate this motion. So you have to also think about how you're going to do that and set them down far enough so that it doesn't just go this way and they go off into space. They can get here, they drop straight down, but you've added a distance. So now you need to have long enough drops, you need to have long enough service loops, you need to have a braking system, all of that good stuff. So you design it and piece it together first. Instead of just putting up a pulley and go, okay, we're going to pull here. Oh, that's too fast. We got to do this. Oh, we got to do that. Oh, we got to. It doesn't make sense to do that because it takes fucking time, and you usually don't get the results you want. So pendulums are useful. They're the simplest form of doing things. I mean, on dance and acrobatic performance, there's a whole lot of human counterweight pendulum motions that go on. You can end up with pendulums and processing in arcs and circles, depending on how dancers take off. A human counterweight on the other end. You can take rope up and sit into the weight. They're not usually traveling super high. If they do, then you get into winch operation, which is like acrobatic straps and big circles and movement. But those are finite, where you pull up X amount of rope, and then the acrobat is moving, and then you lower them down at certain times. And that's all with either winches, or if you're going to do it mechanically, you need a take-up system, i.e. a ratchet or a winch of some variety, and you need a let-out system if it's not going to be 3D and computer controlled, a way of taking out the rope you've taken in to take them up and take them down. And you can do it mechanically. It also hinges on if it has to be repetitive, or if on our business it's just one take, we're cool. But on a acrobat, it's up and down, so it tends to be winch material at that point. There's ways around it, and it can be done. But pendulums are very useful, but you have to pay attention to some basics. And that's on pulling, okay? That's one thing to look at. Now on dropping, and this is what got me thinking about pendulums for the last week or two, is people have been posting jumping from one place to another. And you're bringing them from A to B, and whether it's jumping up or jumping down to something, they're moving and they're using their momentum. You're not pulling them, they're jumping or diving or running and jumping. What happens the minute you start dropping from a pulley is the object will start to center under the pulley, okay? So if you have a pulley and your rope is here and you jump off, as you hit the ground, as you go tight with that rope, if it's fixed, you will hit and you will swing, i.e. you see the giant swings and the rope swings that everybody builds. You see all the super humongous ones in Utah. You see people doing it off of bridges. You see all that. They got 50 meters of slack in a rope. They move over to one side of the bridge. They dive out into space and they free fall for a long time. And as they hit tension, the minute they start to go tight, they don't stop here because of gravity, so they go to the tension of the rope, then they swing, okay? And that's a big, giant swing, okay? That's cool, and you watch them just... In our business, we need them to jump, maybe swing, and then land in a very specific spot. So now, again, you have to deal with how do you get rid of all of that acceleration you've created? How do you manage the speed vector of that? Another thing is like in car transfers, people will put a pulley at a great place for the takeoff, but as they swing, they're not under the pulley, they're penduluming all the way to, say, the vehicle, which is great. Now the pulley's here and they're here. Well, if something like they don't get their hands on what they're supposed to, or they bounce off of it, what's the situation going to be? They're going to do this, and they're going to swing back out because the pulley is 3 meters, 4 meters out on a boom arm or a piece of truss from the vehicle. Okay, so this also gets into doing things like multiple gold tails from different points, which you've seen in some movies. You can move that pulley. So as they jump, the pulley's here. As they swing, they reach the short point, and you can move that pulley on a track system. There's a bazillion ways to do it. You mount a track system on that so the pulley is fixed here, and as you process under it, you bring it in. So now at the end, as they grab, and if they fuck it up, the pulley's over them. They're not going to swing anywhere. They're not going anywhere. You've negated, by moving that pulley, you have negated their forward momentum. Okay? So that's what happens, is if the pulley's over you, you have no more forward momentum, especially once you've passed that point. If you get to that point and let someone out, they're not going to swing any farther. So if you jump and someone swings to here and you just let it go, they're going to go to here, and then gravity, they're going to go straight down. Okay? So that stops that whole forward vector because it hinges on a fixed distance. Okay? That's what the pendulum does. It's all based on that fixed distance. If you suddenly change that in the middle of the stroke, then you have negated all of that, and you have no more forward momentum. And try it sometime. You know, if you ever want to fuck around, set up a big pulley on the perms, you know, set 6 meters of rope, and then take off from a 6 meter platform, dive out, and as you swing under it, have somebody just go with a gold tail and let you go. You will land basically directly under your pulley. Okay, and the fact is, you won't need a brake, you'll just need someone to gold tail you down. It's a fairly fast landing at that point, but you will cover those 6 meters and come to a stop basically directly under your pulley. Okay, so that will negate it. So a lot of times, especially when dropping, and you notice it, people will dive off of a balcony or get blown off a balcony. If the pulley isn't under them when they start decelerating, they will swing back under it. So they can do this, and all of a sudden the pulley's out here. As you start decelerating them, they will move here. Well, have you considered so then they're going to swing out here. And unless they're close enough to the ground to set them down, they're going to swing to here. And once they're at the end of this distance, they're going to swing back. So they may be swinging out and swinging back as you let them go. So if it's a building, they jump out 3 meters, right? And however high you are, if you don't let out enough line soon enough, they will swing past their pulley, and then they will be swinging back towards the side of the building or the wall. Okay, and it's only 3 meters, and it can be very close, you know. And what happens is you have to judge, you have to mathematically, you can calculate this pendulum point and the distance they go. So you always typically want the pulley, especially when it drops, you want the pulley directly over your landing. Okay, and it can be plus or minus a bit, you know, because you can't really read that. But that's what you try to do. And it's really, you know, you can see it when you drop somebody. If they jump into a drop, if you watch them dive, if they don't make it to the pulley, they swing out. But if it's high enough, they will always swing back. Now you have to wait till they swing back out to set them on their mark. So that looks kind of stupid doing this. You know, so you have to decide the distance you're going to drop versus your pulley, and put the pulley under their landing, directly over their landing, so they're landing under your pulley. And it's really important on drops. And one of the sneaky things to do is to be able to move that pulley. You know, you can jump off, like a gold tail is a great case study. You jump off something, and the gold tail pulley is, you know, however far away you're going to jump. So you jump 2-3 meters, and you land directly where you want to land. That's great. Now you're going to run 5 meters to the side and jump again. Okay, well that isn't going to work because your pulley is directly over this point, and now you're 5 meters over here. So what will happen is, as you jump, you will swing back under this pulley and possibly past it as you're dropping. And again, it's the distance the next drop, how you're going to do this. So that pulley needs to be over here. So you can have movable pulley systems to do that. It's just, and they're not that complicated. You just have to plan in advance for them. You know, it's just, especially when doing drops, always orient wherever your landing is with the pulley directly above it. And that way you'll save it. And I also saw it like with the car stuff I've looked at recently. It all functioned, it all got done well, but the problem I have with a lot of that, where you're jumping onto from one stationary spot, you dive onto a moving vehicle. The problem is the pulley needs to be far enough in the midpoint, if you're going to pendulum it, to get you up so you start moving towards the vehicle. But you can't get enough speed in a pendulum to if you hit the vehicle too fast and you don't get your grip, or you don't, whatever the object is, it's a train, it's a fucking whatever it is, then you come loose, your pulley's behind you, so you're going to swing back out, and typically you're going to be high enough. But if you're close to the car and you're on, say, a car roof or a train, you're 4 meters off the ground on a train, and that pulley's behind you and it's now tight because you've pendulumed, they've done the take up, pulled you up, you've jumped, now you've landed on the train. Well, the thing is you're going to come free of that and swing back and forth here in space, which is not optimal. And in addition, this distance here is preventing you from possibly, they have to let out enough line because of the change of distances to get you to land. And if you let out that line up here and you've landed, well, what's that put it when you're down here? How close to the ground? You don't want to be dragging your feet on the ground. And it's not that big a deal with something that's 4 or 5 meters in the air, but if it's a 2 meter tall car, the hypotenuse and the height, if you've got enough slack in that line to get where you need to get because the pulley is spaced away from the vehicle, that difference is probably enough so your feet are dragging the ground, okay, which is not really optimal. The ideal is if you're going to fuck it up or if something happens, you stay at the height of the vehicle where you're supposed to land and you can't go. They catch you, you hold you, and then you stop and redo it. But that would imply the pulley needs to move in close enough over your landing spot. So that would be the optimal way to do it. And all you do is time it. You jump, they pull up the slack, they process the pulley in as you're arcing into your landing. Now the pulley's directly over, it may be half a meter off the car because that's the back of your body or whatever. So now you grab the vehicle, and if you don't and something fucks up, all you're going to do is hang directly under your pulley. And you're going to be well off the ground and you're not going anywhere. You're not swinging in the breeze back and forth like a, plumb bob on a string. So these are things, especially when dropping, which I did on the board here, which I don't think we need to beleaguer anymore. You will always orient under your pulley, and you need to plan for that. You can watch that anytime when people jump, or even when people are slightly out of line on their pulley, they jump and drop, and if you just put a little quick tension on it, you'll see what happens. It'll go whack, and they'll suddenly swing over under it. Gravity works vertically, kids. You fall in a straight line down, unless you're in a wingsuit or something. So, if you're going to drop and you're not under the point you're dropping from, you're going to move forward or backward to that point. Okay? Probably worse is having the point too close to, say, the side of the building, and as you dive out, you clear it by 2 meters, and as they put the brakes on, you're going to swing back with the speed and everything you've created and smack right into the building, which is probably not pleasant. Okay, so these are things, it's a pendulum, but you got to think about them and the reactions that take place. And especially when descending or dropping, or however you want to phrase it, these are issues you need to concern. And also the what ifs. What if the person doesn't get their hands on the object they're supposed to grab? What's that going to do for them? Is that going to leave them? I watched it on a show just a year ago. They had to swing in, jump up on something, and then climb away. Well, as they swang in, they didn't get their hands on stuff. They didn't get up to where they needed to. So as their hands came loose, they swung back out into space. And now they're hanging, 2 meters off the wall in space, just swinging around like a plumb bob. Okay, and that's because of the pulley placement. Okay, these are issues that you have to solve. And a lot of times, there's better ways to do this than a pendulum. But one of the tricks on a pendulum can be a movable pulley, especially in descending, because you have time to, especially if it's a multiple, it's a jump to here, boom, pulleys reset, jump to there, boom. Those work really well. And they're not that complicated. It's just you have to get your sequence down of what moves when. Like a car transfer situation with a boom arm or a truss rig you see mounted on vehicles, that can be problematic because of the speeds and the motion. It's harder when two vehicles are traveling the same speed and you're processing from one to the other. There's no issue because it's basically 0 mile an hour. You're equal speeds. But if you're jumping from or onto something that's moving, you have to consider A, where your pulley placement is to get you to the object, and B, what do you do with the speed vector that you've created to get to that, meaning the jump or the dive or whatever you generated to get to that vehicle, okay? You don't jump on vehicles at 60 miles an hour, so it's not that kind of thing. But, if a vehicle at low speed's going by and you're jumping on the roof of it, or whatever, you have to consider what the failure mode's going to be as well. Where does that leave you, especially if you're on a rig that's on one of the vehicles, and then the failure mode is you dangling from a crane arm next to the car, either close to it, optimal, or where your pulley was 3 meters out at the end of the truss stick, okay? Not optimal. So these are all issues on pendulums that you need to think about. And it's an easy thing to do. Always just draw your triangles and set your angles and attack in the thought process, you attack them one at a time. What's the distance of travel? How far away from plumb do I need to be? Am I descending? Am I pulling up, or am I dropping down? And then you can break it into sections, and you can consider how you need to deal with the speed vector you've created under the pendulum. Those are all part and parcel of using a simple thing like a pendulum. And if those aren't going to work optimally, then you can look at other options. Okay? Then you start looking at, can I pendulum a slack line? It achieves several different things, say in a stage setup, or on a truss boom setup on a moving vehicle. Am I able to jump into this bite and roll down that bite, and I will be in a braking moment at the end of this pendulum, because now it's trying to roll uphill, so I will naturally be decelerating, and by manipulating the slack line, you could lower that person, boom, right onto the hood of the car or whatever. Very simple, easy ways to do it rather than just a single line. And if you need stability, you can run double slacks, and that way they can't wiggle this way, they can only go in one direction. There's ways to mitigate each and every one of these things, and you need to think about them ahead of time to design an optimal rig. Again, not every rig is optimal, and a lot of times people get away with stuff and it works. It functions and nobody died. But is it actually elegant or optimal? No, it's not. It could have been done way better and should have been done way better if you planned or drew it out ahead of time and thought about it instead of just starting to hook line and pulleys into things. Okay? So that's my little wrap today on pendulums. It's kind of boring, but there's a lot to think about. And an easy way to watch all this is to play with it. I have little old Sweeney pulleys. They're about this long. In American money, they're probably like an inch and a quarter long. And I'll get some thin 2 mil or 3 mil line, and I'll string things up and put a little weight on one, and I'll make a mock-up, a scale. If it's X height I want to go, I'll scale it to something, and then I'll hang it all on a stick or a piece of speed rail or a aluminium tube, whatever you want to call it. I will hang it all and start playing with it and watch the actions and reactions, and I can scale it. I literally can measure it on the floor while I play with it and go, yes, that's going to function. Oh, that does that. That goes there. And it's pretty easy to do that kind of stuff, to scale stuff up. But before you even, that's on serious rigs. We did a 3-to-1 slackline pull that had to clear an entire set with a performer from the far front edge of set all the way to the back edge of set, and there was only a small landing area before they hit the wall. And this is in an old, big, huge studio that was a former shipyard building warehouse. And it was a huge set. It had big castle-y, it was like a whole, deal. I won't mention the show. But the person had to start at a lower elevation in front on a parapet, and they get shot with a flaming arrow, and they had to fly up through some debris they broke over the entire set, and then land basically back here at a slightly higher elevation than they took off without touching any of this stuff in between. And what we did was, instead of a pendulum or anything like that, we used a slack line, super high, super steep, and we took the bite, so where the bite is, we based on the middle of the set between our 2 points. So we knew we had to take off here and land here. Okay? And what we did was, that's where we put the first pulley. And we moved the bite with them all the way to here. And actually, we cheated it slightly forward because we knew we'd have so much speed for the travel that we wanted more braking on the backside. And when we yanked him, he went up, rolled along the belly, cleared the entire set, and then as he went into uphill and was slowing down, at that point we could just let out on the rams, which exhausted, and since he was higher on landing than he took off, we were able to decelerate him short distance and land him on a very small single mat. Okay? And worked 35 times in a row. Boom, boom. You could tape an X on the floor and he landed there every time. Okay? And that was a very, very, very long travel of probably 20 meters, 30 meters or more. Very, very long. But we had the advantage of ceiling height to play with. And then that way, the speed at takeoff looked great. The distance of take-up was relatively large to clear all of that. So we had the ram at 3-to-1 in terms of, 1 to 3, let me be accurate. So for every bit of stroke, we took up 3 times as much rope. And then that got him high enough to clear everything. And as he swung back, the bite started to go into the negative braking mode, and we were able to just lower it down. And that was an easy way to travel it as opposed to a pendulum, because the pendulum would have generated so much speed, we would have braking lines on them in order to try to do it. And there was no way from the wall on the other side, it was such a high point, it was 20 meters in the air, to climb over there and put a stopping line, plus the line would get dragged over the entire set as he was braking. So that would be also destroying all of the hard work for all the set decks and everybody all through the way. So we opted for a way to do it that was self-braking, and we were able to use both ends of the rolling slack, the takeoff end to generate the travel speed and the braking end to reduce all of the forces, so that it was just a very gentle set down on a very thin mat, a standard 8-inch mat, and a couple cardboard boxes, a layer under them. So that became quite efficient. So you need to sit and think about these things. There's ways that pendulums work and there's ways they don't. And once you start exceeding parameters, you need another system, a braking system, of this, of that, and you have to think about it. So it's not all as simple as people want to make out. And like I said, it's simple if all you're trying to do is huck somebody from A and don't give a fuck where they land, or huck somebody from A and you get quick enough to figure out where you're going to land them. But you got to deal with all the other forces you're generating. And in descending under pulleys, you also always have to think about the pendulum, because that's going to work against you, generally speaking. in terms of safety, in terms of where you land, all of those things. So you need to really consider where your point placement is, because the minute you put tension on that line, people will process back directly under that pulley. And if they're out of line of that pulley, you'll see them come back under it. So that becomes a question of how much time and distance do you have. And again, you don't want them seesawing their way down like a puppet on a string. Okay, that's usually not what you're looking for. Just a few thoughts, just some easy stuff to think about for pendulums, but it's something that's so simple that people think they know it all and just, ignore the basics. All right, take care. That's today's long-winded wrap on pendulums.